Today, I am going to be holding myself accountable because this time last year, I posted a video on my main channel, which was the books that I wanted to read in 2024, my 2024 TBR, my to be read pile. And it was like this big book haul, and I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed thinking, I'm going to read every single one of these books, I'm going to consume every one of these things. And one of the questions that I get asked more than anything in the comments of my YouTube channels, my Instagram account, my TikTok account, etc., my Goodreads is, do you actually read all of the books that you talk about on your channel? And the answer, I think, is mostly yes. I like to think that I do, but my collection has been growing and growing and growing quite rapidly and exponentially. So today I am going to be putting myself to the test and crunching some numbers because I'm going to watch back the video that I made a year ago and see if I actually read the books that I said I was going to read. There is a hair on my mic. That needs to go. Okay, so welcome back to Jack in the Books. Welcome back to my second channel. This is my first video of 2025, so Happy New Year. Welcome back. Thanks for being here. Much appreciated. And let's load up this video. So the first book that I spoke about was White Nights by Dostoevsky. Why did I buy this? Because I was influenced. I literally saw one tweet that said, very simply, you think you understand love, and then you read White Nights by Dostoevsky. And I said, sold. Take my card, cash or credit. I really love Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, but that's the only of his books that I've read. It's described as a devastating story of solitude and unrequited love. So, say no more. So, this book and I went on a journey in 2024. This was crazy and kind of unprecedented, but basically I made a couple of TikToks about this book, and it then went on to become the fourth biggest selling translation of the year. This is a book from like 1848, which is insane. And I think the reason that it resonated with so many people is because it is a book about love and loneliness, and that's why it resonated with me. But I think also it's a book about how we can project onto other people what we want to see in them. So are you in love with the person, or are you in love with the idea of the person, the idea you have projected onto them? And in this book, it's the latter. And as a result, there's kind of this unrequited love and misery ultimately, but still bliss temporarily, in how two people confide in one another and find temporary happiness or relief in one another. So I really liked this book, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. It makes me think of when Greta Gerwig adapted Little Women, and she said, like, I didn't make Little Women modern. I looked for what was modern about it. I looked back at the original source material and found the modern elements, and that's what you're resonating with, because just because it's a classic doesn't mean that it can't speak to universal truths that have continued to exist. So anyway, I think that's the beauty of White Knight. So thematically, it's very accessible and relatable in many ways, but also it's cheap. It's a £3 book. It's very short. It's 80 pages. So the time commitment and investment is short. The financial investment is relatively low. And so I think that's why it reached so many people. And I'm buzzing about that. That is so cool. Yeah, that was crazy. But yes, I did read that one. Devils by Dostoevsky. This is Devils, translated by Constance Garnett. In 1869, a young Russian was strangled, shot through the head, and thrown into a pond. His crime? A wish to leave a small group of revolutionaries from which he had become alienated. I have not yet read. The next book was this one. So this is A Thousand Mornings. This is one of her poetry collections. Whether studying the leaves of a tree or mourning her treasured dog Percy, Oliver is beautifully open to the teachings contained within the smallest of moments. Mary Oliver's poetry is just so magical. This book was no exception. This was one of my favorites of her books that I've read. Her books grapple with like the natural world and what we can learn from it and how nature can be our greatest teacher. She's always kind of in conversation with the world around her, and I really like that. I find it very grounding. It makes me want to go and like literally touch grass. You know, on the internet when people are like, touch grass. The internet is not the whole world. There's a real world out there too. Mary Oliver's poems do that for me. They're the poetry equivalent of like hugging a tree. They make me want to go and like milk a cow, like fetch a pail of water. I love her poetry. I loved this collection. Then we have another Mary Oliver collection. This is her other poetry collection, Dog Songs, and these are all about dogs. Just about that inexplicable bond that we have with our pets, with the dogs in our lives, and it really captures the essence of that love that we have for our little fluffy companions. So I read Dog Songs. This one didn't quite like hit the same for me, though I did like it. I do think this would be such a good gift for anyone in your life who's like a dog owner and lover. Oh, then more poetry. We had some Sappho. I also picked up this book. This is Fragments of Sappho, called If Not Winter, and it's translated by Anne Carson. In 2023, one of my favorite books that I read, and actually one of the last books of the year that I read, was called After Sappho, and that is a collection of kind of vignettes almost about different women working in creative industries who came after the poet Sappho. In that collection, there were so many references, of course, to the poet Sappho. She was like the center of gravity, I guess, that we kept returning to, and what made the collection cohesive. And so immediately, I went to the bookshop and was like, I need more of that. I need a whole collection of Sappho's poetry, and so that's what this is. So that was If Not Winter, which is like fragments of Sappho's poetry. And this one is like hard to review because it is just, I mean, it does what it says on the tin. It is just fragments because a lot of Sappho's poetry just hasn't survived. And so these are kind of the fragments that have been found and Anne Carson has translated. There is some absolute gold within this collection. Like I say, it's hard to review because most of the poems are incomplete. So a lot of the time you just get like kind of rogue words or random verses or little pieces of a line rather than the whole line. What you do get is gorgeous. I wish we had more, but that's just not the reality. So hard to review, but special to read. And it really does feel like a little piece of history. Okay, next I spoke about Hilary Mantel, who I would love to read books from. I mean, this is what I said a year ago. The GOAT of historical fiction was, of course, Hilary Mantel. Wolf Hall is held in such high regard as kind of like the pinnacle of historical fiction. Like, this is as good as it gets. In Wolf Hall, one of our very best writers brings the opulent, brutal world of the Tudors to bloody, glittering life. It is the backdrop to the rise and rise of Thomas Cromwell, lowborn boy, charmer, bully, master of deadly intrigue, and finally, most powerful of Henry VIII's courtiers. Did I read these books? No, I did not. I find them really intimidating, I will say, and I do think you have to be in a very specific state of mind to read and enjoy Wolf Hall, as well as Bring Up the Bodies. So I have not yet read these books, but I know that I need to read them and be like, Sensei, teach me your ways. When it comes to kind of historical fiction, Hilary Mantel is the GOAT. I will read these books. They are rolling over onto my 2025 TBR, but they have not yet been read. The next book was about Studio Ghibli, which is so cool. It's called Now Go. This is a book all about how grief is portrayed in Studio Ghibli movies, which I thought was fascinating. Grief is real, it's physical, it doesn't just happen or even happen to you. It is there next to you always. Grief is all around us, even at the heart of the brightly coloured, vividly characterised, joyful films of Studio Ghibli. They are racked with loss, and Now Go explores that. So like I said, this is a study on grief specifically in the Studio Ghibli movies, and I read it, I loved it. I polished this off on like a single train journey and just went through all of the motions. Because, you know, it makes you look inwards as well. Any book about grief is going to make you think about the grief that you too have experienced. I thought this one had fascinating insights, and it's so much more than just a book about grief in Studio Ghibli. It's about so many other themes as well, but a really interesting entry point. It covers so much ground in such a slim volume, and I liked this a lot. This is a very special book, and again, this would make a great gift for someone in your life who's like obsessed with Studio Ghibli. Oh, the next book was What You Are Looking For is in the Library. This is by Michiko Aoyama and translated by Alison Watts, originally published in Japanese and was the winner of the Japanese Booksellers Award. So if booksellers voted for this as being a great book about book selling, that's got to stand for something, right? And basically, one thing you can absolutely guarantee is if there's a Japanese book with a cat on the cover, It's going in my collection. I did not get around to reading this one, unfortunately. Yeah, I have no excuse. I don't know why I was like about to share. It just hasn't been one that I've gravitated towards. I know exactly where it is on that shelf up there, but it just hasn't been one I've like wanted to, get around to. I don't know. I have no excuse. So I guess we'll just move on. We then had Diary of a Bookseller. This is by Sean Bydel. It's described as warm, witty, and laugh out loud funny, which I did not read. And we also had Interesting Stories About Curious Words by Susie Dent. Now, Susie Dent works on the show Countdown in Dictionary Corner, and she is a lexicographer and dictionary expert. So she talks a lot about word etymology, which basically just means the origin of words. I saw her at Hay Festival last year and freaked out. Like, I was genuinely starstruck. Now, the crazy thing is, in this video, I was talking about how Susie Dent is like my Oprah. I was saying that she was my dream dinner party guest. I was really hyping up Susie Dent, okay? And the coolest thing is that her team saw this video and they invited me to meet Susie Dent. Oh my God, it was just so cool. She was everything I wanted her to be. I love her podcast. I've read so many of her books about words. I've been to so many of her talks about words, word etymology, idioms, phrases, where they come from, why we use them, their language origins. I just think she's amazing. And so to get to work with her, because she released her first fiction book last year, which I did read, which is called Guilty by Definition, set in Oxford, all about people who work for the dictionary, but also a kind of murder mystery thriller. And it's so brilliant for her first fiction book. It's just so good. And I got to work with her on the audiobook. So her team invited me down to the studio, and basically the audiobook is narrated by an actor. And then at the end of the audiobook, there's like a Q&A with Susie Dent, and I got to interview her. Like, it was so cool. Such a pinch me moment. She was absolutely amazing. I got to interview her twice last year, and both times she was just incredible. So do meet your heroes. If they're Susie Dent, you should meet your heroes. That was so phenomenal, and like something that you just never imagine will happen. Yeah. Ooh. Still, I can't get my head around that. My feet are chilly because my socks have been knocked off. In the Margins by Elena Ferrante, on the pleasures of reading and writing. I love books about writing by writers because they write with such fondness about the thing that they have dedicated their life to. I did read, this is Elena Ferrante's guide to writing and her kind of analyses on the literary landscape and publishing and, you know, the love of the craft, as well as specific authors as well. This one was really hard to track down. I remember like finding it very difficult to find a copy of this book, but it shouldn't be hard to find because it is amazing and kind of priceless to get insights from some of the best writers around, you know, like Stephen King's book on writing. There's like Bird by Bird, or George Saunders has written a book on writing, Joan Didion, Deborah Levy, and they're just such amazing. George Orwell. Yeah, George Orwell's essay is called Why I Write, and then lots of other authors have kind of responded to that. And I just think it's so amazing to get to hear why authors write in the way that they do, what inspires them. You know, the authors that inspire me, to get to hear what inspires them is so special. Elena Ferrante's book, My Brilliant Friend, was just voted in the New York Times the best book of the 21st century. So we should absolutely be listening to what she has to say. Next was my first full book that I read from Clarice Lispector. It kind of just changed my life. So this is Agua Viva. In this book, Clarice Lispector aims to capture the present. Her direct, confessional, and unfiltered meditations on everything from life and time to perfume and sleep are strange and hypnotic in their emotional power and have been a huge influence on many artists and writers. I did read Agua Viva. I thought it was amazing. Her books are short, but they're hard work because each individual sentence is so meticulously crafted, but brilliantly, and every sentence is perfect, I would say. Like, I can't fault her writing at all. So for me, as someone who wants to be a writer, I felt like I was at a masterclass when reading Clarice Lispector's work, and this led me to read other Clarice Lispector books as well. So this was a big success and a new favourite writer of mine for sure. Beyond the Door of No Return, I bought because I loved David Diop's other book, which is called At Night All Blood is Black. Translated from French by Sam Taylor, this is described as stunningly realised and written in exquisite prose. It's a love story, an adventure tale, and an unflinching examination of the unexpected ways that colonialism and greed ravaged everyone it touched, European and African. Did I read this book? No, I didn't. I know. Sometimes I am guilty of prioritizing authors I've never read anything from. I find this happens to me a lot when authors whose work I've previously adored, they release a new book, and I'm kind of like, because I feel like I already know I will like this, I'm almost more curious to read a book by an author who I haven't read anything from yet, so that I can then see if I like their work. I know that's like a weird mentality, but it's just how my noggin works. So I loved even At Night All Blood is Black. I have not yet read this one. Julia, which is Julia's perspective of 1984. It's kind of like fan fiction of Orwell. It is a retelling of 1984. This is what I had to say about it a year ago. I think this might be my most highly anticipated book of the whole year, and I'm almost like saving this book for the right moment where I can really just become obsessed with it. I really hope that I have such high expectations of this book. If it lets me down, I genuinely don't know if I'll ever recover. And unfortunately, I was a little let down. I think that I had really maybe perhaps overhyped this book and my expectations of it. I didn't love it as much as I loved 1984, and that's not always true with literary retellings. You know, James by Percival Everett I actually like way more than Huckleberry Finn. Wide Sargasso Sea I think is completely on par with Jane Eyre, and these are essentially kind of like fan fiction sequels of classic books but written by someone who isn't the original author. That's the same case for Julia by Sandra Newman. I just felt like it was basic, perhaps, or it just didn't live up to the sheer incredibleness and the sheer kind of vastness of the world building of Orwell. I just think 1984 is such a singular achievement, and I expect I would have put money on me loving this book, and so I was so devastated when I didn't. I didn't not like it, and I read it voraciously, but I just wanted more from it, and found that when you read a book that is a retelling of another book, inevitably you're going to compare it, and I just didn't think it matched up with Orwell. I don't think you could put the two sentences side by side and think that it was the same book. Not that you necessarily should, but they should be of equal quality, and I just didn't feel like Julia was of the same quality as 1984. Sorry. Yeah, I just didn't gel with this one as much as I expected to, and I so wanted to love it. So no one is more disappointed by that than me. YN by SDE, I unfortunately did not yet read, but this is what I said about it a year ago, and that still stands. It's about feeling like your life has only just begun when a certain person arrives into it, and also an insight into fan or stan culture. I guess it gets its title from the kind of fan fiction thing of YN, meaning your name, so you can insert yourself into a narrative, and maybe we're all meant to insert ourselves into this narrative and think about our relation to the people we are fans of. Wait, I sold that book really well. Prophet, I also have not yet read. Your happiest memory is their deadliest weapon. And also Neil Gaiman describes it as fabulous, a page turner. And if it's good enough for Neil, it's good enough for me. Mundo Cruel. This is Louis Negron's Mundo Cruel, and it's translated by Suzanne Jill Levine. And it's a short story collection about the queer community and attitudes towards the queer community in Puerto Rico. I did read. It was my third book that I read last year, so I read it quite a while ago now, like almost a year ago. And it's this collection of queer Puerto Rican short stories, and I just thought they were brilliant. I thought they were all very neatly tied up. They were very satisfying short stories to read. My only critique is that I wish there had been some interlinking between the stories, just because I felt like that would have created more of a sense of community. But maybe these individual experiences are what make that community what it is. I don't know. I just would have loved if like some characters had cropped up in, you know, Taylor Jenkins Reid style, where it's like the Taylor Jenkins Reid cinematic universe. I would have loved like a Mundo Cruel cinematic universe. You know, just I think to make it more cohesive, and yeah, like I said, to make it feel like they were a community of people within one place. On Women by Susan Sontag. This is her collection of essays on women, of the female experience. Sontag was one of the most formidable, original, and influential thinkers of the last century, and indeed, her writing rejects the familiar and refuses party lines. Notes on Camp, I think, is one of the best books ever. On Women, I unfortunately have not yet read, but I need to. I just know that it's a book that I'm going to want to sit with like a pen and a notebook and just take notes from and try to absorb everything kind of by osmosis and try and even get like 1% of Susan Sontag's intelligence, and I would be infinitely better as a person. It's just one that I think I feel intimidated by because I know how important it will be to read. So I'm almost like waiting for the perfect moment. Will that ever come? I hope so. Hopefully in 2025. Next, a book with a title that was unfortunately better than the text that I read. A nearby country called Love. Just take a minute, a moment of silence to appreciate that title. Thank you. This is by Salar Abdo. It's described as harrowing, beautiful, surprising. If you start your novel description with harrowing, I will be reading it. Thank you. God, he goes on, doesn't he? That was A Nearby Country Called Love. Such a shame, because that is such a great title, but I just didn't really gel with this book. Before we check to see if I have read the next book, one thing I have been very consistent with my use and love of is Squarespace. I love Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for building a website or an online brand. And the best news is you don't need any coding experience. You don't need to be an expert web developer, because Squarespace has hundreds, yes, hundreds of incredible templates that you can use and you can customize and make them completely your own. There are great features that you can use, like being able to create a blog or an email sign-up list. There are great AI tools as well as AI SEOs, so you can make sure that your website is appearing on search engines and all of your hard work is being put to good use and you're putting your best foot forward and people can discover your website online, and your customers can have access to flexible payments. So if all of that sounds amazing, which it should, you can head to squarespace.com right now for a free trial. Give it a while, take it for a spin, see what you can do with it. And then when you're ready to launch your beautiful new website, you can head to squarespace.com/jackinthebooks and use the code jackinthebooks to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you so much to Squarespace for working with me. And now, the next book, The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. I did start this book, but unfortunately, I actually DNF'd it. This is what I said about it a year ago. It's kind of giving me Sula by Toni Morrison energy, and that's my favorite book ever. So I need this in my life. I can't wait to read it, and I'll let you know very soon what I think. And I'm still baffled by the fact that I didn't really get on with the writing style. I think that I just need to give it another go. I think sometimes it's like right book, wrong time. Yeah, it didn't work for me when I tried to read it. I was just finding the sentence structure a little bit clunky and almost confusing. Like I remember reading the beginning and just being like, I'm completely lost. And sometimes that isn't a sign of good writing, like things aren't meant to be confusing all the time unless it's deliberately so. I felt like I wasn't excited to pick it up, and so I had it on the back burner for about 2 months where I kept being like, oh, I must finish that book. And in the end I was like, you know what, this life is short. There's only so many hours in my day and there are other things I'd rather read. So it kind of went back onto the shelf and has been collecting dust ever since. But I know how much people adore this book, so I definitely would like to give it another go, maybe in 2025. Maybe I need to dedicate like 1 month to retrying some of these books or reading books that I swore I would read in 2024. Because now that I'm watching this back, I'm like, oh, I do want to read that. Oh, next we had a collection of poetry. This is the Forward Book of Poetry 2024. So this is a poetry anthology. And I like reading poetry anthologies because I think that they're a great way of discovering voices that I may not have come across otherwise. The Forward Book of Poetry, I absolutely loved. I was doing a lot of writing at the time when I read this, and I often gravitate more towards poetry when I am writing a lot of fiction, because it helps me to not want to just like adapt someone else's writing style. Do you know what I mean? Like if you're reading a novel and you're really, really, really into it and you're really, really enjoying it, I think you have to consciously be like, okay, but I am not that author. I would write differently. And that's the reason that people like me collect this many books, or that, any of us read widely, is because every author comes at writing with a different approach, and that diversity of thought and that diversity of skill set and diversity of metaphors and similes and ideas, like that's what makes it so exciting to continue reading. And that's why the pursuit of reading as many books as you can is so fun, because every book is completely different. All this to say, when I'm in a heavy like writing period, I try to just sort of read more poetry, because I am writing in a different medium. It helps me kind of separate like what I'm writing and what I'm reading. So yeah, I was reading this when I was in Korea and I was writing a lot. I was on this kind of writing retreat, and I just remember thinking it was magical. I remember sitting in a park, sun was shining, I was eating a little bit of chicken that I'd bought in 7-Eleven and just feeling so grateful for life, reading my poetry. It's a great way to discover new poems as well. In fact, my iPhone lock screen is a poem that I found in, I think it was this collection, which is called Symbiosis. It's by M. Gray, and I absolutely love it. And then when I was in Korea, I reached out to M. Gray because I was making a vlog at the time, and I was like, hey, M. Gray, would you consider recording yourself reading this lovely poem so that I could include it at the beginning of one of my vlogs? And she said yes. And when I got that message, I was like shaking, I couldn't believe it. And she really kindly sent that voice note that evening. And then I put it in at the beginning of one of my vlogs from Korea and on my main channel. And that one is so special to me because of the poem that is literally still my lock screen all these months later. I got to hear it read by the actual author. Just so cool. Oh, then we also had another poetry book that I really liked. It's called Heritage Aesthetics, an eviscerating lyric tour de force on the personal ramifications of colonial structures and divisive histories. Heritage Aesthetics I thought was so brilliant. Not a word is wasted. It's just one of those absolute gems. I was actually sent this. I didn't go out and buy it. I was sent it. And I'm so grateful that I was. You know, that's why I feel so lucky to do the job that I do, because occasionally, well, a lot of the time I get sent books that weren't on my radar and they arrive at my front door and I read the blurb and I'm like, whoa, that sounds amazing. Or, you know, in my inbox when a publisher requests to send me something and I'm like, wait, that sounds incredible. Sometimes the publishers and the marketing teams know me better than I know myself. And they're like, Jack, you will love this, mate. You need to read this. And with Heritage Aesthetics, they were absolutely correct. The next book was Terrace Story. From the author of the acclaimed novel Temporary, an intimate exploration of time, a fable about love, an epic daydream for a broken-hearted world. Unfortunately, I did not get around to reading that one, but I did read the next book, which is this one. Now, my good friend Ben Mercer makes these wonderful TikToks where he reads aloud from the books that he loves, and one of his favorite books of last year was Kick the Latch. This is described as lightning in a bottle, with its ruthless concision and artful mysteries. Kick the Latch was so good. This was one, I remember reading it, I had just got off a flight to Paris. I was there for Fashion Week, and I took this book in my hand luggage, and I started to read it on my flight, and then I read it for the whole flight, and then I got off the flight, and then I got on the train to my hotel, and I read it the entire train journey as well, and I was just like, it made the journey go so quickly because I could not stop reading this book, and I just thought it was so brilliant, like this awesome mix of fiction and non-fiction, and based on real interviews with a horse trainer, the insight you get about her life and all of the things that she did and the people that she met and the way that she worked with these animals is truly, truly captivating and mesmerizing. I loved Kick the Latch. This next book has the best title. Water Shall Refuse Them. It's by Lucy McKnight Hardy. It's described as an impressive debut which conveys an atmosphere of imminent menace. Still to this day, one of the best titles ever. Unfortunately, I did not read this book, but I will. Oh, and then this was my first 5-star book of the year. So this is Boulder by Eva Baltazar, translated by Julia Sanchez. A lot of people I follow and love on these platforms have really, really sung the praises of this book. Again, it's a quick, short read. Eva Baltazar, The Woman That You Are. I ended up going on to read her first book as well, Permafrost, because Boulder is actually the sequel to Permafrost, but you don't have to read them in order. And I didn't. I read Boulder first. I've said this before on my channel, but there's this one scene, which is like a sex scene, but it's literary. It's so erotic and sensual, but it's also very, very beautifully crafted. And I was meeting a friend who lectures in literature, and I like turn up at this dinner having just read this scene. And I sit down, we're like, hey, how are you? And I'm like, look, before we talk about our lives, before we catch up, I need you to read this scene. You are going to love this book. And so I pass it over the table to him, and he sits and he just reads this one page, and he looks up at me and he was like, please tell me when you're finished with this book. I need to borrow it. And he did, and he loved it too. Boulder is a very, very special book, and my first Catalan book. Yeah, I just think it's so incredible. It's going to be in my best books of the year video. I'm sure that might be out by now, or if it's not, spoiler. But yeah, I'm just in awe of Eva Baltazar. And there's the third book in the series called Mammoth, and I'm sort of just saving that one because once I've read that one, the series is over and I have no books left to read from her for now. So I will be anxiously anticipating her next one, and once she announces the next one, then I'll read Mammoth, and I'm looking forward to it. Next, the book Close to Home. This is luminous and devastating. Close to Home is a novel about deciding what kind of man you want to be and finding your place in the scarred city you call home. Unfortunately, I did not get around to reading this one, and nor did I read Carla. It's set in a seaside town in Ireland, again focusing on people who were friends as children, 6 inseparable teenagers reconnect 15 years later. And the ringleader of that group, Carla, has gone missing. Although I did not read this book, I am desperate to read it, and I think it might be my first read of 2025. This one is still very much at the top of the TBR. Ooh, this next book was another one that I didn't finish. This is The Archive of Feelings. It's by Peter Stam and translated by Michael Hoffman, and it's about getting a second chance with an old love. The Archives of Feeling, I don't know, couldn't get into it. Just couldn't get into it. I think I only read about 10 pages, but there was something, it was kind of like, you know when something looks really tasty, but then you bite into it and you don't like the texture? It's kind of like that. I don't know. I think the writing style just wasn't hitting me where I thought it was going to. Next, we have New Millennium Boys by Alex Kazemi. And this is what I had to say about it a year ago. With this dreamlike dialogue tale of bored, privileged boys, it collides pop culture with the accessibility of internet notoriety. The ultimate blend for our epidemic of sickness unto death, spinning through cyberspace. Unfortunately, I haven't read this book, but I really, really would like to. I think, again, this might be part of my January TBR, or like February kind of time, because I'm very intrigued by this. I like the concept. I'm fascinated. I feel like it's going to be a very unique and distinct authorial voice and tone, and that excites me. So this is definitely on the TBR. Hangman, I also started to read, but then I didn't finish it. In the morning, I received a phone call and was told to board a flight. The arrangements had been made on my behalf. I packed no clothes because my clothes had been packed for me. A car arrived to pick me up. How could you possibly read that and not want to know what happens next? And this book then went on to be longlisted for this year's Women's Prize as well, which is really cool. So I was like ahead of the curve, and now I'm behind the curve. But I will get around to finishing this at some point. Oh, another banger title now. More poetry. This is Survival Takes a Wild Imagination. This is by Fariha Roisin. This poet writes, prays, claws, and scratches her way out of the grips of generational trauma. I was like, I have to read that instantly. Survival Takes a Wild Imagination. That is like a crunchy title, you know? When I think about that as a title, I could just like, delicious. However, I haven't read it yet. The Dictionary People, I also unfortunately have not yet read. This is about the unsung heroes who created the Oxford English Dictionary. I have to say, I did not read that much non-fiction in 2024. I have to fix that in 2025 because the pieces of non-fiction I did read, I really liked. I just was gravitating more towards fiction. Not sure. I guess because I mostly make content about fiction, that does mean that I obviously know more that when I'm reading more fiction, I can make more content for you guys. So that is probably the reason. But yeah, I wish I got around to this one. I will definitely do that in 2025 because I'm so fascinated by the dictionary. You know, one of my favorite facts about the dictionary is that Tolkien worked for the dictionary. And so Tolkien, who wrote The Lord of the Rings, also wrote all of the definitions in the dictionary for words beginning with W. Like the definition for walrus was written by Tolkien, who also wrote The Lord of the Rings, like, and The Hobbit. That just spins me out because they just, in my head, those two things would exist in different timelines, but they actually do exist in the same one, and it confuses my brain, but it's true. Oh, then the next book was actually the first one that I read in 2025, and that is A Shining by John Foss. It's translated by Damien Sarles. This is like a 80-page kind of short story / novella. As I said, I picked up this book because John Foss had won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and I do understand why. My review of this book was that for the first half, I was like, what the fuck? Derogatory. And then in the second half, I was like, what the fuck? Complimentary. It's one of those books you have to stick with. Sometimes those like 120-page zingers, 160-page zingers do have that kind of experience because, you know, if they're short and concise, it does mean often the first half is kind of a build-up or like a bit of a run-up, and then they just launch at you, and it's insane. That's what this book was. But I really, really loved it. I really, really did love this one. It reminded me of like a Phoebe Bridgers song. It was atmospheric, just so good. The next one, I haven't thought about since filming this video a year ago. I'm not going to lie to you. This one is called Boys Alive. It's by Pier Paolo Pasolini and translated from the Italian by Tim Parks. It was originally published in 1955 and it's been republished and repackaged in this edition. And it's described as a novel which kind of splinters off and branches out in all different directions. Yeah. Why did I not read that book? Boys Alive. I mean, it sounds good, doesn't it? Like, now that I am watching that back, I'm like, that does sound really good. That does sound like something I would like to read. But it just completely slipped out of my psyche. Like, it just disappeared from my awareness for some reason. So I have to fix that. And this video is a really good kick up the arse for a lot of these books. The final one, unfortunately, I wish we could end with a bang, but we are going to end with a whimper. I have not yet read this book. But this is The Librarianist. This is by Patrick Dewitt, who also wrote a book called French Exit. From the best-selling and award-winning author comes the story of Bob Comet, a man who has lived his life through his love for literature, unaware his own experience as a poignant and affecting narrative in itself. Guys, it is literally called The Librarian, and I have spent the last few months creating my library. So I think it is time that I read that book. Maybe that one will be my first read of 2025. The trouble is, every time I watched those clips, I'm like, that sounds really good. And I guess that's why I bought them in the first place. So of the 39 books that I spoke about at the beginning of last year, I ended up reading 18 of them. I obviously, as the year went on, discovered other books that I wanted to read. And I'm such a mood reader that when I buy things, I kind of don't always genuinely believe that I will read them like immediately. It's kind of like, oh, I know I will love this at some point. And that was the case with a lot of these books. Like, I still want to read all of these books, the ones that I haven't read yet. And so hopefully I will get around to them in 2025. It's always a mixed bag. You know, sometimes I make my video of like books I want to read this month, and I do manage to read every single one, but often I go completely off piste because I just go with the vibes, just go with how I'm feeling, you know, on any given day, and that's that on that. But thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that this answers the question of, do I actually read all of the books that I say I want to read? And I guess the answer is, I read about half of them, which is honestly probably what I would have predicted. So now we have confirmation. So thank you so much for watching this video. Remember, you can follow me over on Goodreads to see what I read as the year goes on, as well as Threads, where I'll be posting all of my book reviews, Instagram, TikTok, my main channel, etc. You know where to find me. For now though, all the best, stay in touch, have the most wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.